All right, so this morning we're going to continue on through Luke. If you missed last week's Sunday service, of course you can go on our Facebook page and download that. You can watch the video, and actually, the better video than what you saw Sunday is on the Facebook page now. So if you want to watch the video with better audio that I didn't have time to get done before I showed it Sunday, because I had to leave on vacation, because Lindsay would have killed me if I had said, no, give me 4 more hours and I'll be ready. It wouldn't have happened. I would have stayed here. I would have been here all week. I'd have been here in person last week, and she would have been down at the beach. But so if you want to see the one with better audio that actually sounds better than the one last week, then you can get on our Facebook page and watch that, or you can just listen to it if you happen to miss it. This week, though, and last week we talked about who's saved. Who is saved? That's what we talked about last week. Pretty important question. And we've got another important question this week. And the question up here, it says this: what do you do? And let me set it up like this. Very simply, in any situation in life, what do you do? What do you do? Something pops up. Something comes up. Something presents itself. What do you do? Well, Justin, that's a geography question. That depends on where you're at, what you've got going on. Maybe it is. Maybe it is a geography question. Maybe it is based on where you are or what you've got going on. But I think, and we're going to see this morning in Luke chapter 14, I think that in any situation there are some things that we can learn from Jesus that we can do anytime anything comes up. And I believe they hold true every time, whoever you're around, whatever you're doing. I believe these things hold true that we're going to see this morning. And let me speak to Christians, because I think most of us in here are Christians. Let me speak to Christians for just a moment specifically. I believe as Christians, we mess up our Christian witness by, in situations that present themselves, doing what we think other people think we ought to do, other than what we know to be right. I believe we ruin our witness like that. You might say, well, I'm just trying to, be better for so-and-so, or I'm just trying to make so-and-so feel comfortable, or I'm not trying to stir the pot. And sometimes that's okay. But I believe we ruin our Christian witness, our godly witness to people around us, because we do things and we buckle under and do things that we think other people want us to do instead of what we know we ought to do. We're going to look at that this morning in Luke chapter 14, and maybe, hopefully, get a few things out of this. These first 6 verses that will help us. Like I said, in any situation, I believe we can see things that hold true, that help us out in any situation we'll find ourselves in. Luke chapter 14, if you open your Bible there, it's where we are. If not, it'll be up here on the screen. It says this: one Sabbath, when he went to eat, talking about Jesus, at the house of one of the leading Pharisees, they were watching him closely. There in front of him was a man whose body was swollen with fluid. And in response, Jesus asked the law experts and the Pharisees, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? But they kept silent. He took the man, healed him, and sent him away. And he said to them, he said, which of you, whose son or ox falls into a well, will not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? To this, they, talking about those people listening, could find no answer. Let me give you a little background first, and then I've got 3 things we're going to look at this morning real quickly. But let me give you a little background on these verses real quick. Remember, I've said this every week, but remember, Jesus is walking his way literally towards Jerusalem, walking his way towards the cross, towards his sacrifice, his death for us. And everything that he does and everything he says, again, I believe ought to be magnified, ought to be put out there as not more important than everything else, but it probably is more important. These are his last actions before he dies. These are his last words before he dies. All of this is in this trek he's taking, probably again from Nazareth down to Jerusalem. So in verse 1, it talks about on a Sabbath, which would have been a Saturday for them, the day they worship, he was invited to eat with what it says are with a leading Pharisee. Now, this is the 3rd time in Luke. We've talked about all of them, and you might not remember it. It's been over the past couple of years. But we've talked about the other 2 times that Jesus was with a Pharisee. This is the 3rd time in Luke that Jesus is invited to eat by a Pharisee. But this is the first time that's indicated he was with a leading Pharisee. This is with a high up Pharisee. This was not just some regular old guy, okay? This is not just somebody hanging out that calls himself a Pharisee. This is one of the leading Pharisees, one of the big guns. And these guys, it says, in verse 1, were watching him closely. Now, they weren't watching him closely because they're like, man, Jesus, we finally figured it out. He's put us in our place 2 times already. We've invited him to eat. We want to invite him to eat now because we love him so much. He's going to teach us so much. That's not what they said. They were watching him closely because they were trying to trap him. How do we know that? Because verse 2, it talks about a man that was there that had this illness. It was an illness that caused him to build up fluid on his body, probably medically, probably the result of a heart issue or a liver or kidney issue of some kind. Something's going on and they're causing him to build up fluid in his body. But this man had a real illness. And we know that they were using this guy to trap Jesus because of this. And we'll talk more about this in a second. They, being good little religious Jewish people, would not have wanted to be around somebody who had an illness. They equated illness in a body like that with sin that this guy had not gotten rid of. So to be around a sinner who had this illness brought upon him, they would not have wanted to be around him. They would have seen him as unclean, somebody not fit to be around. And so they were using him not to bring in, not because they liked him. They were using this man simply to trap Jesus. And then in verse 3 and 5, we see that he asks a question to which both of them, they have 0 answers. Verse 6 tells us they couldn't find an answer. They could not find an answer to the questions Jesus asked. Jesus and the Pharisees' relationship was strained at best, we would say. On the best day, Jesus and the Pharisees, their relationship was strained on the best day. Jesus was always making their time together uncomfortable. He was always challenging their views on religion, challenging their views on how things should be done. Picture this. If you want to see where these Pharisees and where Jesus is, how their relationship was strained, the Pharisees would have been this type of person. Maybe you've heard of them before. We've never done it that way before. No. We're not going. I've never done that way before. You ever heard of somebody like that? Guarantee you said it about something. No, Justin, I've never said it. Guarantee you said it about something. Now, you might not be as bad as somebody else. You've got somebody in your mind you're thinking of that said that. But you need to replace that person with you because you said it about something. You've said it about something, whether you like it or not. I know you have. But then Jesus, so they were that type of person. They did it a lot. We know that because we see it in Scripture. They were that type of person. Never done it that way before. It's we want to do it old school way. We've never done that before. And Jesus was the type that would have said, you're right. You're right. And that's the problem. You're right, you've never done it that way before. You're right, you've never thought of it that way before. And that's the problem. That's where the problem lies. So if you want to see why their relationship was strained, think about that. I've had friends that have been pastors that have gone to churches that have really had people that say, well, we've never done it that way. We've never done it that way. And this pastor has challenged that, and friends of mine have challenged that and tried to do it in a way that hadn't been done before, and it has blown up. You can imagine what the tension would be like between Jesus and these Pharisees. So, and seeing that story, and you might not even understand where we're going with this, but what can we learn about what's right to do? And like I said, and I believe in any situation, in every situation, what is right to do? What can we know is the right thing? And what can we learn from Jesus? The first thing I think is this. Very important. Don't be intimidated by people who are different than you. First thing is don't be intimidated by people who are different than you. Look back in verse 1. One Sabbath, he went to eat at the house of one who was a leading Pharisee. There's somebody who was different than him. He was a leading Pharisee. Jesus went to eat with these people. But then in verse 2, we come to another guy who was different from him. There in front of him in verse 2 was a man whose body was swollen with fluid. This man had a sickness. He had an illness. Like I said, the Jewish people would have seen him as somebody who had sin in his life, who God had kind of cursed with this illness, who would have seen him as unclean. You've got the Pharisees who would have been seen as the top rung in their own eyes. And you've got this man with an illness who would have been seen as the very, very bottom rung by these religious people. In Jesus' eyes, they were all the same. They were all people who needed love. They were all people who needed Him. But to a normal person, you would have seen somebody at the very top, somebody at the very bottom. Jesus was around both of them, wasn't He? Jesus was not intimidated by somebody who was wealthy and high up on the ladder. And He wasn't intimidated by somebody who had health issues and who was seen as low on the ladder. There's nothing surprising that Jesus was like this. He was just at ease with the elite in society as He was with the less respected in society. Jesus was just as at ease eating with both of them. Now, I told you this was the third time that He had accepted an invitation from the Pharisees. Just in Luke that we see. This is the third time He's accepted that invitation. But this was a leader of the Pharisees. He was in the highest of circles now. Before He had been with some Pharisees, they were up there. This was the highest of circles. It would have been like Jesus eating with the preacher probably. Because think about it. Jesus, this is a meal. The meal they're having was on the Sabbath. It would have been the Sabbath. It would have been Saturday afternoon. It would have been like going out after church on Sunday morning and eating with somebody. It would have been going to somebody's house after church on Sunday morning and eating with somebody. It would have been like going with this high-ranking Pharisee, almost like going and eating with the preacher. Now, some of y'all have had to suffer through that, haven't you? You've had to suffer eating with the preacher before. It's not all bad. It's not all bad. But some of you have had to suffer with that. That's kind of what Jesus was at. He was just at ease. And I can promise you I don't know about other guys. I don't know. I can promise you with me, you can be at ease going out to eat. I promise you that. I can promise you that. You can be at ease going out to eat with me. Now, I'm not going to beg you, but if you wanted to buy my meal sometime, you can always go. But no, that's in all seriousness, that's a joke. But anyway, so you've got these guys, these Pharisees, high-ranking, probably like eating with the preacher, probably in the church what you would consider the highest of the high, put on a pedestal, maybe when they even shouldn't have been put on a pedestal. But then you've got the other guy in the story, this guy who was sick, this guy who had an illness, again, who by regular people would have been seen as cursed by God because of his illness, probably because they thought he had sin in his life. Jesus was just at ease around him as He was with those Pharisees. Think about this. Let me give you another example. Back in Luke chapter 5, we went through this a while ago. Back in Luke chapter 5, we see Jesus calling some of His disciples. One of those is a guy named Matthew. It calls him Levi, actually, in Luke. But Matthew was a tax collector, right? Tax collectors were not seen as real honest people, not seen as real likable people. They would take money from you. It was well known they would steal money from you. It was well known. Well known. And you couldn't do anything about it because you had to pay taxes to them. Whatever they said you owed, you had to owe. You had to try to find the most honest one. It's like going to a used car salesman. You know they're going to make money off of you. You've just got to go to the right one that's going to make the least money off of you, right? The same thing with this tax collector. Shady as all get out. They made money by stealing from people when they didn't have to. Nobody liked Matthew. But Jesus saw Matthew and called him to follow Him. Matthew got up from his tax collector booth, put all of his stuff down, and followed Jesus. But he didn't only do that. Jesus wasn't at ease with that. Jesus was at ease going to His house for a party. Did you hear me? Let me say that again. It says in Scripture, He went to eat with Matthew. He went to a party. He didn't just go and eat some Sunday afternoon dinner with Matthew after church. Let me say it again. He went to a party with Matthew. And Matthew, who had just started following Jesus, didn't know all the rules, probably did things at his party that Jesus wouldn't have liked, but Jesus loved him anyway. He had already called him. He was following. He was trying to follow Jesus. Matthew not only did that, he invited all of his other friends. Who would have been friends of somebody like Matthew back in the Bible? Other sinners. The Bible calls it other, and these were the words of Pharisees that said this, other notorious sinners. That's what they called him in the New Testament. In Luke, that's what they called Matthew and his friends, other notorious sinners. People who were known to be sinners, people who were known to be ungodly, were there at this party. Funny story, there's a guy that I just found out a few weeks ago that I have mutual friends between him. I know one guy that I'm friends with, another guy that I'm friends with, that are friends with this one guy that I didn't know. Well, I have a guy that always wants to play golf with me. and he likes to play golf, and he's got this friend that's mutual between him and this other guy. He's always asking him to play golf, and he'll say, well, who else is going? Well, my preacher from church is going to go, nope, I'm not going. This guy's never played golf with us. He's never played golf. No, I'm not going if the preacher's going. I ain't doing that. No. Funny thing is, I've told you, if you come in Buffalo Wild Wings, you might look back in the back, and you might see in the bar area your preacher sitting with a group of guys. I'll do it. I don't care if you get mad about it. I'll do it anytime. I sat back there. Usually I drink Dr. Pepper, but I'm getting a little bit down here. So I was drinking water this night. Everybody around me was drinking whatever they wanted to drink, but I'm drinking water. The guy we met there, who was mutual friends with another friend I have, was the guy that's never played golf with me. And I didn't know it until afterwards that he was this guy. I would have brought it up. I would have asked him, so you're the guy that won't ever play golf with me. I would have said that. But my hope is this. My hope is that he saw me and was like, yeah, that guy's a preacher. Not in a bad way, but this in a way that maybe I can go play golf with him. Maybe I can get out there and go with him. Maybe I can be around him a little more. Maybe I can open myself up to other people that are halfway religious or whatever he thinks that is. Jesus did the same with Matthew. He did the same with this guy that was different. He didn't care who he was around. He knew what was right. He knew what he needed to do. Pharisees didn't like it when he was at the party with Matthew and his friends. The Pharisees didn't like it that he treated this man the way he did in this story, I can guarantee it. But this man in this story was a test. The Pharisees had seen Jesus be around people like that before, but they were going to test Jesus, knowing his desire to heal this man, but knowing that on the Sabbath day, they had made a rule that you're not allowed to do anything on the Sabbath day. Put so many rules on what you're allowed to do. And they're trying to test Jesus. We know it was a test because of this guy. Think about it. Thereafter, if you could get in a more holy time in your mind, after church, on Sunday or Saturday for them, a bunch of church people around, religious people, Pharisees, and they've got this guy that they know is just a horrible, rotten sinner. Who would be the one person you wouldn't want to have around you after you get feeling good at church? It'd be some notorious sinner, some rotten guy that you think's got something wrong with him. So this guy was nothing but a test. They weren't trying to love him. It was nothing but a test. Some people are intimidated by high-ranking, respected, wealthy people. Some people are intimidated by them. Some people are intimidated by going to the hospital or the nursing home, right? Some people are intimidated about sitting in the bar at Buffalo Wild Wings, right? Some people are intimidated by that. Can't be intimidated by that. You can't be intimidated by people that are different than you. The Lord's called us into every area of life to be a witness for Him. Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, all the ends of the earth, Acts says. Jesus' last words to us were to be a witness everywhere we go. There was a lady one time at another church I was at. Obviously, it's here in Henderson. At another church I was at one time that I had said something about going to Rookies and eating. And she said, oh, well, I'll never go to Rookies. Why don't you go to Rookies? Oh, that's a bar. I said, well, you can go in there and eat. You can just go in there and eat. Oh, you cannot. It's a bar. No. You can walk to the other side if you're really that bad about it. And there's a perfectly good room where you can just eat. Oh, no, you can't. That's a bar in there. She wouldn't even believe me when I told her. So she was intimidated at the thought of what somebody else had told her about a restaurant, let alone about the reality of it. You can't be like that. You can't be intimidated by people or by thoughts. You can't be intimidated by that. You say, well, I don't like religious people. I don't like church people. I've had people say this to me. Too many hypocrites in church. I don't want to be around them. I'm just going to hang out with real people. That's what they go to. I want to be around somebody that's real. Well, no, guess what? Church people need you too. Church people need your love too. Church people you can't be intimidated by people you think are hypocrites. You can't do it. You can't be intimidated by regular people. You can't be intimidated by church people. You can't be intimidated by anybody. You can't give up on anybody. You've got to be around anybody who will let you. You've got to love them like Jesus would love them, which is our second point. Number one, don't be intimidated by people who are different. Number two, Jesus teaches us this in this story. Love everybody you're around. Whether you're around the important, highfalutin people, whether you're around the unimportant people think they're dirt people, or somebody in between. Whoever you're around, love everyone you're around. John 15:12 tells us this. This is my command, Jesus says, love one another as I have loved you. Mark 12:31. Second greatest commandment is this, love your neighbor as yourself. There's no greater command than these. John 13:34, I give you a new command, love one another. Just as I have loved you, you must also love one another. Luke 6:35, but love your enemies, do what is good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Then your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for He is gracious to the ungrateful and evil. Be merciful, just as your Father is also merciful. Jesus was around the Pharisees. Jesus was around this sick guy, and He loved them both. He didn't just say these commands and then not do them Himself. Jesus loved everybody He was around. He loved some of them differently, but He loved everybody He was around. He loved the Pharisees by, even though He knew, and they knew, I believe He knew, that they were going to trap Him or try to trap Him. What did He do? He accepted that invitation. He didn't go, you know what, guys? You invited me to come over and eat, but I know what you're doing. I know the conversations we've had in the past. I don't like you and you don't like me. You know what? Deuces, I'm going somewhere else, okay? I'm going to go and eat. I'm going to go eat with Matthew again and have a party, okay? He didn't say that. He didn't say that. What did he do? He accepted the invitation. That was the way He showed the Pharisees that even though I know you're trying to trap me, I'm going to come eat with you because I love you. I want to come be around you. What about the sick guy? He noticed this man who was in the crowd. The Pharisees didn't bring him up and go, hey, what about this guy, Jesus? No, Jesus just saw him. He noticed him. He loved him by noticing him. And not only did He notice him, He healed this man. And then He took up for this man. He showed that He loved him. Are some people hard to love? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. If you ever had family members, you know what it's like to be hard to love somebody. You ever worked around people? Have you lived anywhere but under a rock or like Antarctica? Then you realize that it's hard to love people sometimes. It's definitely hard to love people sometimes. There was a kid in my youth group in Tennessee that came into the church and stole a bunch of stuff. And the only things, he stole a bunch of stuff, took it across the street on his different trips, felt guilty about it, and then started bringing all of it back, left it in the church. The only two things he didn't bring back, true story, is my guitar and my computer. The only two things. He brought back an Xbox, he brought back sound equipment, brought back other computers, brought back a projector, brought back an Xbox. You name it, he brought it back. He did not bring back my guitar and my computer. It's the only two things. Well, we found out about it, got to the bottom of it the next night, and this kid, he had to go through a bunch of stuff and had to do community service and had to apologize in front of the church as part of his punishment. But I remember the day he came up and asked me, it was while he was doing his community service, and he said, Justin, do you think I can ever come back to youth group? Heck yes, you can come back to youth group. My goodness, that's where you need to be. What do you think the other kids are going to say? I said, you don't care what the other kids are going to say. Well, I've heard some of them talking about me at school. You don't care. Don't worry about what the other kids are going to say. My sermon the night that I got it stolen on a Wednesday morning. I walked in and realized it was stolen. That night I didn't have my good guitar. I had another guitar, but I didn't have my good guitar. I didn't have my computer to put stuff up on the screen. We had a basic, just stripped down service that night. And my sermon was this: you're not any better than anybody else. You are not any better than anybody else. Trying to help those kids see that even though we're all mad, we're all angry, we've got things taken away from us, things messed up, you're not any better than anybody else. And my hope was that when he came back, that they would see that. And they would treat him normal. And so, yeah, I understand it's hard to love people who have stolen from you, who have taken from you. But we've got to learn to love people. We've got to learn. Somebody make you mad? Love them. If somebody hurts you? Love them. Somebody's talked about you? Love them. Somebody is down in life? Love them. If somebody shows you love them anyway. Love them back. You've got to love people. And then the third thing is this. You've got to take the first two things we talked about, and you've got to let that drive every decision you make in life. Don't be intimidated by people, and love everybody you're around. You've got to let those two things drive every decision you make in life. Don't be intimidated, and love everybody you're around. This is the 5th time that we've seen Jesus heal somebody on the Sabbath day. Do you realize that? The 5th time. and the Pharisees hated it more and more every time he did it. The fifth time that Jesus healed on the Sabbath day, not popular with the Pharisees. They thought you shouldn't do anything on the Sabbath day. They took the command that said, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, and they added hundreds of other commands to that one commandment on the Ten Commandments. They named hundreds of others. And so they didn't like it. These church people didn't like it that Jesus was healing people on the Sabbath day. They thought that wasn't the right thing to do. My papa was somebody who probably would have thought a lot like that. I remember going outside and trying to mow the grass for him one Sunday afternoon. And I had made one round in his front yard, and he comes out the door. I don't know what he thought when he heard it start, or what. I guess he thought I was just playing around on it. But I had mowed one round around his yard, and he came out. No, sir, we don't mow grass on Sunday afternoon. I'm just trying to help you. No, we don't mow grass on Sunday afternoon. And so I realized what it's like to be like that. I've thought that at different times. Well, am I allowed to do this on Sunday? Am I allowed to do this on Sunday? I've thought like that. But we've got to let other things drive our mind. Jesus asked him this. He asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Why did he say lawful? Because these people were driven by what the law told them to do. And not only the law, but what their man-made laws had told them to do. That drove their decisions. Not, is it right or wrong? Jesus didn't ask that. He didn't say, is it right for me to heal? Is it right or wrong? Is it godly for me to heal on the Sabbath day? He didn't ask that because they didn't care about that. They cared about what the law said. Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? They lived by the law. He was hitting them with a teaching point right where they most believed, right in the things they held dearest. That's where he was hitting them at. So Jesus heals the guy. And to Jesus, it's common sense. Could not be any more common sense than putting your socks on before your shoes. I mean, it was that much common sense for Jesus to heal this guy. Following the law of love, loving others, is common sense. It's easy to do if you think about it. If you let that drive your life. But I don't have to wonder. I don't have to ask questions. I don't have to read books on how to love my family. It's common sense on how to love, right? When you think about your family, should be some of your family the easiest to love, right? Most of the time. Should be the easiest. You don't have to read books on that. You don't have to ask questions. You don't have to read the Bible, or you don't have to go through a 12-week program to learn how to love your family. You know how to love your family. Husbands, you know how to love your wife. You might not do it the best every time, but you know how to love her. You know. Parents, you know how to love your kids. Even when it's hard to love them, you know how to love your kids. It's common sense. And then verse 5, he asks this question. He says, which of you whose son or ox falls into a well would not immediately pull him out on the Sabbath day? He's trying to help them see common sense, guys. The law of love, the law of loving your neighbor, the law of not putting other people down. Common sense. No thought would go into rescuing your son out of a well. If you for a split second, okay, dads, let me help you understand this. If your son fell into a well, which is not really heard of these days, but if your son fell into a well and you went and told your wife, hey, Slayton's in a well, I'm trying to think about what we ought to do here. I'm not real sure. Number one, I'd have a knot on my head the size of a basketball. Number two, we'd be running towards that well, right? I mean, it doesn't take any thought if something like that happens. If your life depends on livestock and there's somebody, you've got an ox that's fallen in a well or in a ditch or something that can't get out, and your livelihood depends on that, what are you going to do? You're going to pull that thing out. There's no thought on that. If your car breaks down and you have no way to get to work, and it's Sunday, and you're like, well, I don't know if I'm allowed to call a tow truck on a Sunday, get it to a place to let them work on it. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that. No, you're calling AAA and saying, get my car and take it over to Corden to Rick's and let them work on it. I need my car as soon as I can get it. That's what you're going to do. It doesn't take half a brain to realize that. It's common sense. You have to do what needs to be done. And that ought to drive our life. That law of love, loving everyone around us, not being intimidated by anybody, but loving them, ought to drive our life. Now, I've had people say this to me. Well, if your ox falls in a ditch, you shouldn't have had him close to that ditch to fall in it anyway. No, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Scripture never says that. Well, the first time we did Serve Smith Meals, exactly what somebody said to me. Because I said, Jesus said if an ox falls in a well, or actually I said in a ditch, if an ox falls in a ditch, He says we ought to pull it out. We're just pulling oxes out of ditches on Service Smith Field. We're just loving people. We're just doing what needs to be done, trying to serve our community. And somebody literally said to me, well, if your ox falls in a ditch, it shouldn't have been that close anyway. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I didn't tell them that, but that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. It's not true. It's not right. We do what needs to be done. We do whatever we do whatever we have to. Let me give you some examples. If your neighbor is mowing their grass and they're struggling, you jump in and you help them. You don't think about it. If you have a friend that calls you and it's right before Sunday night church, and you're like, man, I don't know, I better not answer this call. I got to go to church. One thing I'm proud of Lindsay for doing is this. If somebody calls her and needs to talk, she's a listening ear that they need to talk to, boy, she will skip church in a heartbeat to talk to them because she knows that's where her ministry is at that moment. She will do that. I've seen her do it before. She will do that. And that makes me proud of her to know that she loves people that way. Well, if we have a chance to serve our community one Sunday a year in Serve Smith Mills, we do it. We don't even think about it. We ought to do it. It's common sense to serve your community. We've got more examples than that. What about a Halloween party? It's common sense. We ought to do that without even thinking. You're going to be involved in the Halloween party without even thinking. And by the way, next week, we're going to talk about why we do Halloween, because a lot of people don't like that word. We've got friends that don't do Halloween because they think it's the devil's holiday. We're going to talk about why we do it and why we call it a Halloween party. We're going to talk about that next week. So, buckle down. What about Easter egg hunt? You ought to not even think about that. You ought to do it. You ought to just jump in and do it. What about we hand out flyers or we take batteries around for the time change and hand them to people in our community? You ought to do it. You ought not even think about it. It's common sense to serve in that way. Vacation Bible School, you ought to do it. I saw some of y'all jump into Bible school this year that have never helped with Bible school before. And y'all just jumped in and just did what you could do. I love that. You ought to do that without thinking. Center Shot, you ought to jump in and help without thinking. And let me tell you this, the best way you can help a Center Shot now, we have people that can help coach. We've got all that. We've got plenty of people to do that. But let me tell you the number one way you can help a Center Shot now, if you don't have anywhere else to help. You're like, I don't know what to do, Justin. You come and sit back there at a table with a family and talk to them. That is the most vital thing you can do now, because if you don't do that, and we've got 61 kids here and their families, and none of them have met any of us, none of them have built relationships with any of us, well, then after January, when we go around to all these houses and say, hey, we're just thinking about you, we love you, we want you to come visit us at church, they're going to say, psh, I ain't coming to y'all's church. You didn't even come talk to me while I was at your church. I was there and you never even acknowledged me. You've got to come talk to people. If you don't have anything else to do today, you come over for an hour or two and just sit and just meet people. We've got to figure out the common sense things to do and love people and do it. No thought involved. You just do it. Following God's rule of love for anybody is easy. We just got to love. We just love people. Not being intimidated by people is loving people. Not being intimidated by your boss at work, that means you just love them. You might have a healthy fear of them, and that's okay. But not being intimidated by them is just loving them. Not being intimidated by that person you see on the street is just loving them. It's just loving them. Slayton, proud of him, I told you about this. We went last spring to Washington, D.C. We knew we were going to see a bunch of homeless people. And so Slayton said, why don't we take money and give it to them? And I said, nah, let's not do money. We can think of something else better to do. What about take like little breakfast bars, something that they can use and have and eat, and something that would help them out. And if they don't have food, they're going to welcome it. So we took a couple boxes of breakfast bars and kept them in our backpack. And when we saw a homeless person that was asking for something, we didn't just give to everybody we saw, but somebody that was really asking for something, somebody that had reached the bottom of their humility and would ask for a handout. Slayton did it every time. Kate's did it a couple times. Slayton pretty much did it every time. Go up and said, we don't have any money to give you. We do have these breakfast bars we want you to be able to eat. For some people, those were the scariest people to be around. You don't know how they're going to act. You don't know why they're homeless. You don't know why they're in that position. Slayton, it never crossed his mind to think like that. He just loved them. He just loved them. We've got to be. You can't be intimidated. The law of love of Jesus tells us that we love people no matter who they are or what they've done. Maybe this morning you need to accept God's love for you. Maybe you can't love people like that because you've never been saved. Maybe you wonder why other people can love people like that, why they're not intimidated, why they just love anybody. Well, it's because That's because they know God's love. If you don't know God's love, you can't love other people like that. You will be intimidated. You will be scared. You will wonder about other people. You won't be able to love people. But if you know God's love, you can love people. So if this morning you don't know God's love, you need to know it this morning. You need to believe that Jesus loved you so much that He came and He lived a life for you, died on a cross for you. Not only did He die on a cross for you, but He rose from the grave after 3 days to defeat sin and to defeat death, to show you that He's powerful over everything. And He's waiting for you to accept Him today. He's waiting for you to accept His love today. Maybe you can't love others because you don't know God's love for you. Maybe you just need to accept that. Justin, I don't know what that means. Well, it just means really that you surrender. You just kind of give up. You say, God, I can't do this on my own. I just need You. I want You in my life. I need You to come in and forgive me of my sins because I can't do that on my own. And I want to try to start living for You. And your life changes like that. Now, not everything in your life changes like that, but your life as a whole changes like that. Your heart changes like that. The things you think start to change. The things you do start to change. You start that process of becoming more and more like Jesus. Maybe you're in that process of being more like Jesus, but you're just kind of stuck. Maybe you do have that intimidation of other people because you find it hard to love everybody. Maybe you need to come down here and just leave that at the altar this morning. You just need to leave that thought of that intimidation, that fact that you just have a hard time loving people. Maybe you just need to leave that down here at the altar here in a little bit. It'll be wide open for you to come down and just pray if you need to. Whatever it is you need to do this morning, you need to do that and do it quickly. Common sense. Man, the one thing left out of churches today is common sense. But the law of love that Jesus gives us is perfectly full of common sense. Perfectly full of it. Do what needs to be done. Step in where you need to step in. Do the things you know you need to do. Do the things you know are right. And don't be intimidated by others in the process. Let's pray this morning. Father, we do love You. God, we thank You for Your law of love and the way You showed us this morning, Lord, in any situation how to respond. That's with loving people. It seems so easy, but it's such a hard thing to do, Lord. It's especially a hard thing to do consistently. Help us to be a person individually that loves people. Lord, help us to be a church that loves people. Help us to be seen. When people talk about Mount Pleasant, help them not to say, well, they've got a nice gym, or they do center shot, or they got a bald-headed preacher, or nothing that, Jesus. Help them to say, when they hear about Mount Pleasant, they say, wow, it's a church that loves people, man. They just seem like they just love everybody. Lord, we want to be that church. We want to be those people. Help us to be those people, Lord. Push us along. Help us not be intimidated by anybody. I don't feel like we are. Lord, help us to love everybody. I feel like we do that. Lord, help us to do it better. Somebody here today, Lord, needs Your love because they don't know Your love yet. Lord, I pray that they would accept You this morning, that they would be saved from their sins, Lord, that they would start a new life with You. Lord, I pray if that's what they wish to do, that they would come down, share that with me, Lord, so I can show them exactly what it means to be saved down here at the front, Father. Lord, we do thank You for all that You do for us, Lord. And we ask all this in Your name. Amen.